What's going on, guys? So, feelings of fatigue, how to interpret them. This is super important. Like I see all the time, people talking about whoops, readiness scores, body batteries, and all this stuff. And I never see anyone talking about how to properly interpret your perceived fatigue before and during a session. This is absolute basics of being in tune with your body and then using that information you're getting back from yourself to interpret and adjust your training. This isn't an extensive list. This is ones that came to mind when I sat down to think about it. There's almost an endless number of different types of feedback your body will give you. These are just little ideas that hopefully will stimulate things for you, and you can then get in touch with how your own body is feeling throughout a session. So without any more intro, let's get into it. So start of a ride, I've got 3 I want to run through when you first get on the bike, things to be in touch with. First one is really simple, pure muscle soreness. So you get on the bike, the quote I'm thinking of here is, my legs are sore, it hurts to pedal. So acute muscle pain when you first get on the bike. This will be for things like if you've gone to the gym the day before and you've got that delayed onset muscle soreness, or maybe you've done a whole bunch of gardening or some sort of off-bike activity that your body's not used to, and you wake up the next day and your body is just wrecked. Your muscles are acutely sore as soon as you get on the bike. The thing with acute muscle soreness is that it's not necessarily linked to a decrease in performance. So you can get on the bike and be sore from the gym the previous day, but aerobically still perform really well. So what you're looking to do here, if you're having really extensive muscle soreness, is to extend your warm-up. Give yourself a long warm-up time to get blood flowing, to get the heat in the muscles, to get your muscles relaxed and work through some of that pain and soreness you've got at the start of the ride. Chances are you might come good and be able to do the session as you normally would without much of an aerobic performance, endurance performance decrease in a session. If this muscle soreness is a repeat thing for you, you probably do want to look at what's causing it and reduce that. So the most common one you're going to get it from is from gym work. Best way to reduce DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness from gym work, is to reduce the volume in the gym, reduce the number of sets. So you're still getting a good strength stimulus, but you're not doing a whole heap of sets that's causing that muscle damage and that soreness. So reducing the number of sets you're doing. All right, next one. I'm going to move through these pretty quickly because I got a long list here. So strap yourself in. We're going to punch through them. Next one is being physically drained as soon as you get on the bike. So the quote I'm thinking here is, my body is too tired to turn the pedal. So not pure muscle soreness, I'm talking being physically drained. So sometimes, similar with muscle soreness, if you do an extended warm-up, you can start to come good if you give yourself more time to warm up. After you do that longer warm-up as well, let's say you've done 30, 40 minutes, that's when you can really objectively judge whether you're going to be able to complete your intended session properly or not, or if you really are tired, drained, and you do need to reassess whether you should complete that session or not. So you need to do that after warm-up though, because sometimes you can come good after a warm-up, even if you're feeling drained. Whether you continue on with the session as well depends on where you are in the week or month. Let's say you're in an overload week in terms of your periodization. You're midway through or at the end of an overload week where you or your coach is expecting you to be drained. You might want to push through and just try and complete that session. If it's, if you're 2 weeks into a 4-week progression and you start of the week, you're supposed to be feeling good and you're super drained, then obviously something's gone wrong there. And that's probably when you'd want to skip that session and readjust or do a lower intensity variant of that session. 2 other things on this one is that if this is happening to you regularly, you do need to look at perhaps acute or chronic glycogen depletion. Primarily, glycogen depletion is what's going to cause that really drained feeling when you get on the bike. So if this is something you're running into all the time, I would say you need to look at your recovery, which is predominantly controlled by how much you can replenish your glycogen. Other thing there is you need to distinguish between being physically drained and being sleepy or tired, which is the next one I'm going to get into. So there's a distinction between having sore muscles, having drained muscles, and then the next one I'm going to get onto, which is being sleepy. So the third one I've got here at the very start of a ride is general sleepiness. So what I'm thinking here is, in terms of a quote, you're thinking like, I wanted to sleep in, like I'm literally half asleep on the bike, almost yawning. So being aware of sleepiness. To me, this is a big red flag too. Sleep quantity, acute and chronic. So in terms of like 3 or 4 nights and also over the course of weeks, is very closely linked to getting sick. A lot of the times people think they get sick because they're overtraining. Research shows it's more likely just because they're undersleeping. So if you're not getting enough sleep, obviously, it impacts your recovery and things like that, but you're also really increasing your chance of just getting sick, getting illness. Being able to distinguish between sleepiness, muscle fatigue, and a physical drain is really important, because that's really going to let you know what you need to work on in terms of getting rid of those symptoms. So being in tune to those as you first get on the bike is super important. So moving on, now I'm going to go into the symptoms of fatigue you're going to get throughout a ride or a training session. This is really what I wanted to focus on in this video, because I really find it quite interesting. Being in tune with these symptoms will really allow you to understand yourself and your training a lot better. If you're not really tuned into these, and anytime you think about a ride or your coach asks you and all you can report back is, or I didn't feel good, or I didn't have good legs, or it wasn't my day, that stuff is too general. You really need to be digging into the details of exactly why you didn't complete a session or didn't feel good on a ride with specific details. So let me run through some of the things I'm thinking about here. First one is that you can be too fresh. So here what I'm thinking about is my heart rate's going through the roof and my lungs are really burning. That is quite often just from being too fresh. So most often you'll get this if you've had a complete rest day the day before, then you're going into a hard training session and you can get that feeling where your lungs are burning, your heart rate's pumping out of your chest. That's often just because you are too fresh. So what you can do to mitigate this is, again, do a longer warm-up, 30 plus minutes. Give your body time to relax and work through some of that freshness before starting your efforts. Sometimes though, you are just too fresh to do a hard aerobic training session. So if that is the case, what you could do is do a session with shorter effort. So let's say you had a rest day on a Monday and you were planning on doing a threshold session on the Tuesday, but you get started and you're just too fresh, heart rate's too high, you're not feeling good. What you might want to do is do some shorter efforts. So if you did have a day that had, let's say, some sprint efforts or some efforts under about 5 minutes long, it can be good to do them when you are fresher, because they're going to be less impacted by your freshness on that day. Then what you can do is move those threshold efforts or those more aerobic efforts to a day when you've got a little bit more load in the system, a little bit more fatigue in the legs, where you're more likely to perform better in those longer aerobic efforts. Next thing along a similar vein is actually being overstimulated. So you go out to do a session and you're just thinking, my heart's being out of my chest and my legs are really burning. And what this can sometimes be is not being too fresh, but being too stimulated. So you can get this if you've had too much caffeine. I don't know if you've ever had too many coffees and you go out to do a session and like your heart's being out of your chest and you just can't relax into an effort properly. That's being overstimulated. This can also happen on race day. Some of you may know you've got an optimal level of arousal for performance. So under aroused, you won't perform. Then you've got the optimal level of arousal, which is the right amount of stimulation to help you perform well. But you can actually be overstimulated, which is when your performance will drop. So this could be, for example, like the first few laps of a criterium you're doing, especially if there's a bit of a crowd, especially if it's a big race, which you were quite nervous for. You can be overstimulated, and it's that really uncomfortable feeling where your heart rate's through the roof and you don't really have any control over the effort. You're not relaxed. So a couple of things you can do here. First thing is just reduce the stimulants, especially if you know you're already going to be, especially if you know it's a race you're already going to be nervous for. Perhaps there's going to be a crowd, bit of a buzz going on. You might want to not have caffeine or a coffee before the ride, just to reduce your level of arousal, which is already going to be high from those other factors. Other thing you might want to do is, again, similar to being too fresh, is just do a longer warm-up. Do 45 minutes to an hour even warm-up. Give your body time to work through that anxiety, to relax, to settle down, get back to a normal feeling, then hit the start line and you can be a bit more relaxed and have everything under control. Other thing you can do here is get out of your head as well. Sometimes the overstimulation can be psychological. So what you might want to do is, if you're particularly, I've found looking at power on a screen can cause overstimulation, at least for myself and from some other riders. So just taking power off the screen having a real simple screen, maybe just with time or with speed, something that's not going to cause you to be overstimulated psychologically. So if you are finding, especially at the start of a race or at the start of a time trial, you're getting overstimulated, try taking power off your head unit screen. If you're doing a training session and you've taken power off the screen, it's also a good opportunity to focus more internally on what your body's doing. So focusing on relaxation and on your effort level, or focusing on your pedal stroke. How is your leg feeling throughout the pedal stroke? Something to take your mind away from the power, away from the nerves and the anxiety, and just bring it yourself back internally, and focusing on how you're feeling each pedal stroke can help reduce the arousal level. Next one, we've got bonking, so hitting the wall, running out of sugar. So here you're thinking like, I'm desperate for a Coke. So the problem with this is it can be quite hard to describe the feeling of bonking, because it can be, sometimes riders can be bonking and they just think their muscles are tired, or they think they're just physically drained. The symptoms can sometimes overlap. So the actual specific feeling of hitting the wall and bonking is quite hard to explain, but I think most of you that have hit the wall know what the feeling is of running out of sugar. So if you are in a training session or a race and you're getting this feeling, unfortunately, most of the time it's too late. Once you feel like you're bonking or hitting the wall, you're not going to be able to replace the sugars in your sugar stores in your body enough to overtake the rate at which you're depleting them. So you can have a gel, take some sugar in, which can help you get through the rest of the training session or get through the race, but you're never going to be able to fully come good. So just keep in mind that you really need to try, especially in an intense, hard training session or a race, you need to avoid even slightly getting the feeling you might be bonking, because once you feel it again, it's really hard to come back from that. Depending on what the training session is, you may need to cut your losses. So let's say you're 3 hours into a hard 4-hour training session and you're like, oh, I'm hitting the wall, I'm bonking here. Sometimes it is better just to go, okay, I've cooked it, I haven't eaten enough, I'm bonking, I'm just gonna stop the session here, maybe go straight home, drop the intensity down, try again another day, and not really dig yourself that hole. Depending on where the session sits in the week and the month, it actually sometimes is smarter not to fully run yourself into the ground just to finish the session. So I think a lot of the time it can be smarter just to cut your losses and end the session, maybe refuel, try again in a day or two's time. Final thing on this one is don't confuse bonking in hitting the wall with acute muscular fatigue, which is the next one I'm going to get onto, because they can be quite similar. So you've got bonking hitting the wall, which is fatigue and failure in a race or a session from not having enough fuel. Then you've got real acute muscular fatigue, which is you may have enough fuel on board, but the quote I'm going to say here is, I've done too much work, my legs are cooked. So you could have been having 100 grams of carbs an hour and still get this acute muscular fatigue where your muscles have gone through too much work, they're not accustomed to that load, they're too damaged, and they just can't produce the power. So a lot of the time, this is truly end of the line, legitimate fatigue. You have reached failure. A lot of the time you will hit this in a race. You get to the end of a 3, 4, 5 hour race and you've fueled well, but you're just cooked. You've done a lot of work, you've got a high normalized power for the race, and your muscles are fatigued. That is natural. You've pushed your limits, you've fueled well, that's all well and good. So well done. If you've actually reached pure acute muscular fatigue, that's actually really good, because it means you haven't bonked, it means you haven't blown up from the conditions being too hot, but you've really done a good effort and you've reached a truly maximal level of fatigue. So chances are, if you actually reach proper muscular fatigue, you've had a good race. You're probably going to have some good power numbers. Your normalized power over let's say you're doing a 3-hour, 4-hour road race, chances are you're going to have some good numbers there. So if you've reached this point, well done. The only thing I will say on this specifically is that if it's a key race or a key training session, this is where caffeine can really help. So you're fueling well, everything's under control, you're well hydrated, but you're just starting to get cooked. You're in that 3rd or 4th hour. Muscles are starting to reach the end of their working lifespan. Some extra exogenous stimulation like caffeine can help increase your power output, or just extend the point at which you get dropped in a road race. So where you are getting this muscular fatigue is where stimulants, in particular things like caffeine, will help the most. They will have, I found especially, they will have their most bang for their buck when you are most fatigued. All right, two more. Second last one, we've got not being warmed up enough. So what you might be thinking here is, this is too much effort for the power I'm doing and I'm on a bad day. This is a very common one. I think people go out, maybe they do a 10 or 15 minute warm up, they try and start their effort and they go, oh, crap legs today, can't do it. A lot of the time, maybe you just haven't warmed up enough. So give yourself more time to warm up. So instead of doing a 15 or 20 minute warm up, you might want to extend that out to 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes. A lot of the time, you give yourself more time to warm up, you actually find, oh, I'm actually on a good day and I can do pretty good power on this day. This is going to be most common when you're more fatigued. So in the second half of a training week, or at the end of a progression you've done over a period of weeks, you might find that it gets progressively longer and longer for you to feel good as you get into a ride, and you're going to need to give yourself more time to warm up. So just be aware, if you are getting into structured training, or you're just new at your riding in general, don't always count yourself off in the first 10 or 15 minutes of a ride and just think you're cooked. Give yourself time to warm up, work into a session. You might find you actually have pretty good legs once you do an extended warm-up period. Last one of the most important as well, that's often overlooked, is just overheating over ride. So here we're thinking is, I'm dripping with sweat, I feel really uncomfortable, my heart rate's super high, and I can't put out good power. Those are signs that you might actually be overheating and not necessarily on a bad day. This is super common. Riders all the time, they think, oh, what's wrong with me? I had a really crap day, my power output sucks. I go and look at their ride, average temperature was 28 degrees, was 32 degrees Celsius. I'm going, you're coming out of winter, temperatures rise, you're just struggling in the heat. And that's okay, that's natural, that's normal. But that's something you need to be in tune with, and that you can recognize what the symptoms of that are, so you don't put your head through a spin thinking that you've lost all your fitness. A race, for example, and it's in the heat, and maybe you're not super used to the heat, you just need to be aware that you're not going to be able to do great power. And compared to some of the other riders who might have be better in the heat than you might underperform. And that is what it is. That's just the conditions on the day. If it's a training session as well, especially if it's an intense training session, you're doing efforts at, let's say, threshold or above, you might want to just move your days around. So you're doing your higher intensity efforts when it's cooler and you can do good power. So what did you think of that, guys? I mean, there's so many more I can think of. If you're an asthmatic, maybe if you start getting asthma symptoms out on a ride, that's another one you need to be tuned into. If you have really bad allergies or hay fever, if you start getting symptoms of that on a ride, that's something you need to be tuned into. I could go on and on. There's almost an endless list of different types of fatigue which you need to look out for. But the main thing I want to get across in this video is that tune into your feelings of fatigue and use that to adjust or give a bit of context to your training. And I think this is the first step before you start looking at wearables and wellness tech and fatigue trackers and things like that. Start being in tune with your own body first, so you know how to interpret that. And some of these wearable techs you can add in on the top for an extra layer. But this comes first. This is just the basis of everything that's related to training. So I hope you've got something out of this video and found it interesting. Thanks for watching this far, and I'll catch you in the next one.